Yes, Jesus, we bless you and we thank you. We praise you and we lift our hands to you and we turn to you today. We say you are the King of Kings. For your love has broken the power of sin and darkness. You are here right now. We draw near to you. Amen. Well, it's great to worship together this morning. Why don't you turn to somebody and give a good hello this morning. Maybe meet somebody new.
And in time, this one reminds the other of a past, a life lived much too fast to hold on to. Losing you, a broken house, another dry month waiting for the rain. I have been resisting this decay. I thought you'd do the same, but this is all I ever was, and this is all you came across those years ago. Now you go too far. Don't tell me that I changed, because that's not the truth, and now I'm losing you. Fragile sound, the world outside just watches as we crawl towards a life of fragile lines and wasted time. So I cry as I hold you for the last time in this life. This life I tried so hard to give to you. What would you have me do? But this is all I ever was, and this is all you came across those years ago. Now you go too far. Was where you stopped. You were the only one, but now I see your eyes move too fast. You were the only one. Careful hands and wandering without that much to say. Your words are empty as the bed we made. Is there another way? Oh, is there another way? But this is all I ever was, and this is all you came across those years ago. Now you go too far. Don't tell me that I changed, because that's not the truth. And now I'm losing you. And now I'm losing you.
Well, good morning. Come on back. Welcome. It's good to see you guys this morning. My name's Mike. I'm the senior pastor here. Just want to welcome you, especially if you're new with us this morning. I know it can be a little intimidating to check out a new church and who are all these crazy people that want to shake my hand. This is a little bit of an excessively friendly church. I hope you were warned. We are carrying on with our series on John's Gospel this morning, but before we do, a few announcements. If you're new with us, there's in the seat backs in front of you, behind the tray tables, there is a Connect card. And you fill that out. You can bring it out there. We've got free gifts, music, CDs, those kind of things. But it's a great way to ask questions. If you want to get more information, you can request it on there. But those are in the seat backs. Easter's coming. I don't know if you guys realize despite the weather today, it is getting warmer. Springtime is coming. And there are some sign-ups going around for Easter Sunday morning. Easter will be a big celebration, and as always, but we've got baptisms happening, which makes it a really fun Sunday. People sharing their stories of faith, and we will have a bunch of great food out there if you bring it. So sign up. And it's great. There's invitations that are going to come out in the next few weeks. You can give to friends and family. We're prepared. Easter is a great time to bring people who otherwise may not be sure about church. It'll be a wonderful morning. We've also got a Good Friday service coming up. And this one's a little outside the box for us. Typically, we have a worship service in here. And this year, our band and some of our other ministry leaders are preparing a totally different deal. It's a self-guided, walk-through, meditative prayer experience for Good Friday, sort of like a Stations of the Cross, or at least our spin on Stations. You can come between 6 and 8 p.m., and it's going to be, it'll be a great thing. The way I'm trying to set it up is such that somebody, like our neighbors, we could invite neighbors who aren't Christians, but we could simply say, if you've ever wondered about what the crucifixion's about, what it is that makes, this whole thing, this church tick, come on Good Friday. It's going to be like an interactive experience, telling the story, an introduction to kind of spiritual life and prayer. So it should be a great event. There'll be invitations in the next couple weeks, and I encourage you to bring somebody who's curious about what Jesus means, what the cross means, why we consider Easter so significant. And they will be able to just participate without, it won't be in here. It'll be up to them, as much or as little as they want to participate. So that's Good Friday, Holy Week, Easter. But we've also got our Seeds of Hope offering coming up. Some of you have gotten flyers. There's more if you didn't get one out in the foyer. Seeds of Hope is our annual offering that we take as a church to care for the needs of the poor in our congregation in Northeast Grand Rapids. We've been doing this for about 10 years and together given away about over $500,000 through different means, food pantries, assistance grants, and we're going to be taking another offering on Easter Sunday morning. And I'd encourage you now to begin praying and thinking as a family or an individual, how are you going to participate in this? It's an awesome thing to be part of a church where we don't just talk about good news, we are living good news for people who are suffering, for people in need. And so this offering will underwrite everything from our food pantry to the counseling center that is emerging, to car repair, to emergency assistance, and just giving people a hand up who need help. So I would love for you to be part of that. We're trying to raise $30,000, and that's coming on Easter. Well, John's Gospel. We're coming in on the home stretch here. It's been a year in John's Gospel. I hope it's been as interesting for you as me. I've loved going through this at this pace and just digging into the story John is telling about Jesus. Today we are continuing in this passion story. For 4 weeks we're talking about what does the cross mean? What is it all about? And I suggested last week that we probably don't really understand the cross as well as we think. We're a little overly familiar. We've seen the imagery so much. We've heard the stories if you were raised in church since you were a kid, and we're probably over familiar. So we're going to look at John chapter 18 today. If you don't have a Bible, you can download one from your app store or something, or you can raise your hand and somebody will bring you one. I don't know how much longer we're going to need paper ones, really, but yeah, raise your hand and somebody could bring you a free Bible. This is worth looking at the story yourself because this story has changed lives and shaped cultures, shaped nations. Before you get to John 18, though, John 12, I mentioned last week, is where Jesus begins talking about the crucifixion. And here's how he describes what's about to happen to him. John 12:31. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. And in case you didn't get it, John adds, he said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. Exalted is the word, lifted up from the earth. And we have a lot to learn about the cross because for us it's come to symbolize lots of different things. And over the history of the church, it's often been misunderstood. It's even been misused and misapplied and misappropriated. The cross has not always drawn people from all walks of life to Jesus. It has not always drawn people. Sometimes it's represented some pretty ugly things. Now, of course, originally, the cross was an ugly thing. It was perhaps the most frightening tool of torture in the ancient world. You may have heard this, but the Greco-Roman world looked at the cross not as a religious symbol, but they associated it with bad guys. Like the cross was the most humiliating, degrading, awful death possible. Used not just to torture and kill somebody, but to completely decimate their reputation. And it was a frightful thing. I mean, Roman citizens, they said, Roman citizens are too good to see a crucifixion. Like, you shouldn't even look on it with your good Roman eyes. But Rome used it to just squelch dissent and just stomp out rebellion. And in the days of Jesus, the cross was one of the most hideous symbols imaginable and would have caused fear in anyone. Even the word would bring up your worst nightmares. And somehow, it became this beautiful religious symbol that we wear around our necks. But the cross, I don't think it symbolizes the same thing for all people. We bring meaning to it. We have projected meanings on it. And if we're honest, for some of us, the cross is more like it's a special piece of jewelry, but it's more like a logo. It signifies that we're part of the Jesus Club. I mean, for some, the cross has been treated like a religious lucky charm, like a charm bracelet. It wards off evil. It protects us somehow. We wear it and God must bless us somehow. For some, the cross represents little more than a license to sin. To do what we like. God, thank you for the cross. The blood covers everything, so I can just go out and do what I want the rest of my life because God died for me. I mean, that's the way we treat the cross. In some periods of history, the cross has been treated like a coat of arms. And we put it on the front of our shields, as they did during the Crusades. We paint it on the wings of warplanes. And the cross has come to mean, to represent that, moral authority. Like, we're on God's side. We're the good guys, obviously. We're waging God's holy war. The cross has been used to represent all kinds of things. But for some, the cross has represented something much more frightening, much more life-giving than any of those other symbols. The cross has represented an invitation to come and die, to give your life to God, to let Him kill you so He can give you your life back. I mean, the cross has represented a way of life that chooses self-sacrifice. And Jesus said, when I'm lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. All humanity will just be drawn in towards me. And yet not all versions of the cross story are equally attractive. Not all of them draw people in. Some are downright repelling. And I read some commentary this week on the cross that, or at least one version of the cross, that was pretty harsh. It was by a non-Christian who has a lot to say about Christians, but is an avowed non-Christian. And it stung a little in the first service, so I wonder if you're up for this. I think you are. I think it's important that we listen to what people are, the conversations happening about the cross and about those who would follow in the way of the one who died on the cross. So you guys, are you okay with this? Yeah, you probably shouldn't have answered because you answer me afterward. Okay. All right, so here's what he writes. He says, if you're a Christian that supports killing and torturing your enemy, you really have to come up with a new name for yourself. Capping thy enemy is not exactly what Jesus would do. For almost 2,000 years, Christians have been lawyering the Bible to try to figure out how love thy neighbor can actually mean hate thy neighbor. Martin Luther King gets to call himself a Christian because he actually practiced loving his enemies. And Gandhi was so bleeping Christian, he was Hindu. But if you're endorsing revenge, torture, or war, you cannot say you're a follower of the guy who explicitly said, love your enemy and do good to those who hate you. And not to put too fine a point on it, but nonviolence was kind of Jesus' trademark, kind of his big thing. To not follow that part of it is like joining Greenpeace and hating whales. There's interpreting, and then there's just ignoring. It's just ignoring if you're for torture, as are more evangelical Christians than any other religion, at least according to this guy. You're supposed to look at that figure of Christ on the cross and think, how could a man suffer like that? And forgive. Now, I'm a non-Christian, just like most Christians. If you're ignoring every single thing Jesus commanded you to do, you're not a Christian. You're just auditing. You're not Christ's followers. You're just fans. Ouch. Do you think that could be true? Do you think he misunderstands the cross? Or is he onto something? I mean, the challenge of this is that everybody wants to believe they're the good guy. We're the good guys. Do you think he's onto something, or does he misunderstand the cross? This is a question we need to grapple with the cross. Now, the cross challenges us because it challenges what we hold true and dear. It challenges us to evaluate, are we really on God's side? Do we even want to be on God's side if God looks like Jesus? So looking again at John chapter 18, last week I asked the question, why did Jesus die? Why did he go to the cross? And I suggested to you that Jesus, at the beginning of the chapter, it says he leaves the city of kings, Jerusalem, and goes back to the garden. And the garden being the place, from the very beginning where God meets humanity and gives them a choice. And Jesus offered a choice. And I said last week that Jesus died on the cross because of human choices. And we talked about Judas, who made a choice to betray Jesus because it was profitable. And maybe because he'd stopped buying into Jesus' message of the kingdom. I said last week in verse 4 that Jesus, knowing what was about to happen, went out and he engaged the enemy, and he made a choice. He made a choice to follow his own moral teaching, to not resist an evil person. So we stopped at verse 13 last week, though, after Jesus is handed over and Peter tries to get violent on one of the guards, and Jesus says, "Put your sword away." We stopped after Jesus was handed over and bound. And so let's continue now in verse 13. They bound him and they brought him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Now, Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. This is sort of a wink-wink statement from John. Caiaphas, he was the one that said it would be good if Jesus died, one man for the people. Only Caiaphas had no idea what he was talking about. The story goes back to John 11 from a few months ago. It's right after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And, I think this is probably true in any age. When somebody brings someone back from the dead, their popularity instantly goes up. Like, if a politician brought somebody back from the dead, they would probably get elected. And Jesus' popularity is rising after Lazarus, so much so that the leaders of Israel are getting nervous. They're thinking, this guy, not only does he think he's a Messiah, but the people are starting to believe he is. And they're worried about a political uprising. And they're worried that Rome is going to come, as they typically do, and just crush the rebellion. And just stomp them down and tear down the temple and end their way of life. And so here's what we read in John chapter 11. Here's this man performing many signs, the religious leaders argue. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die than the whole nation perish." And John fills in the blanks. He says, he did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. And not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, the Gentiles, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. So Jesus not only died because of Judas's choice and his own choice, he dies because Caiaphas makes a choice that one man should die for the people. Rather than the whole nation suffer, Caiaphas makes the decision to put national security ahead of justice for this one man. Now, next in the text, we read verse 15, we read about Peter, too, will make a choice here. He'll deny Jesus 3 times. He'll decide, after Jesus says, "Put your sword away," Peter will say, "I don't know if I can follow this guy." Now, his vision of the kingdom is it's just too costly. It's too dangerous. But then we read after Peter's denials, the high priest questioned Jesus, and one of them just slaps him, don't talk back to the high priest. And then we read in verse 28 that it says the Jewish leaders took him from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So here they are, unjustly turning this guy over, making untrue allegations against this guy, seeking the death of an innocent man, but they're going to make sure they cross their religious T's and dot their I's because we want to stay right with God. I mean, that's where Israel is, its leadership is at this point. So it says Pilate came out and asked them, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "Well, if he wasn't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you, obviously." And Pilate says, "Well, take him yourselves then and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate here himself is in a jam. He's facing a choice. Not only does Judas have a choice and Caiaphas make a choice, Pilate has a choice here. They bring him Jesus, and the reality that Pilate's living in is he cannot allow another rebellion to happen on his watch. He's been entrusted this province by the emperor himself to watch over, and things have not gone well for Pilate so far. This little province, whom he thought would just be an easy, small little place to rule, turns out to have all kinds of political upheaval and rebellions afoot. They're just his supervisors, his overseers know that this is not going well, and so Pilate's career is on the line. Pilate too will face a choice. So reading on, verse 33, it says, Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews? Are you?" "Is that your own idea," Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" There goes Jesus, just answering questions with a question, like he so often does. Pilate replies, "Am I a Jew? How would I know? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you've done? I mean, there must be something." And then Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "Well, you are a king then," says Pilate. Jesus answered, "Well, you say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into this world was to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Truth. What is truth? Says Pilate retorted. So Pilate faces a choice here. And on one level, Jesus dies because of human choices. But behind those choices are entire belief systems, cultural systems, kingdom systems. Behind these choices are clash of kingdoms, of different views on truth, different views of what is ultimately true about the world and how it works. Jesus died not just because of human choices, but because of a clash of kingdoms. Jesus was up against several different kingdoms, and that's what led to his death. So I want to talk with us for a few minutes about the kingdoms Jesus was up against, because it teaches us something about our own choices to follow a man like this. Now, the first kingdom Jesus was up against is represented by Caiaphas here, and I suppose Peter to some extent. It's the kingdom of Israel, a theocracy, a one nation under God. And if you're going to pick a kingdom model, a kingdom belief, a belief system about the world, you could do a whole lot worse than theocracy. I mean, to build a kingdom on the notion that we all submit to God and follow his laws, well, you could do a lot worse than that, right? Like that's not so bad. to say, we're going to be a nation that lifts up God's name and follows his law and serves God together. So what's the problem with that? Well, because it's clashing with Jesus. Somehow these people are running headlong into Jesus. Now, the background of this is Israel had always been God's chosen people. They'd been called apart from among the nations to be God's chosen special people. And every Jew held that to be true. God called Abraham back in the beginning, back in Genesis chapter 12. God calls Abraham and says, I'm going to make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And God called Moses after the Exodus and said, tell the people, I've carried you out of Egypt on eagle's wings. I've carried you to myself to be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, we read in Exodus 19, God says, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And that was Israel's truth. We are God's favorite. We are God's people. We are his nation. Now, the problem here is they had confused their calling. They'd confused the reason for their calling with the purpose of their calling. I mean, why did God pick these people? What did he have in mind for Israel? Does God just like Jewish people better? What's with that? Well, the truth is, God picked Israel for a purpose, for a special role, and it's right there in the pages of Old Testament Scripture. Back in Genesis 12, it says, I will make you a nation, Abraham, and bless you, and so that all peoples of the earth will be blessed by you. And then we read in the prophets the complaint, you are called to be a light to the Gentiles, that my salvation may come to the ends of the earth. I mean, the people of Israel were called to be priests who would bring the whole world to God. But by the time of Jesus, Israel had completely lost its way. I mean, they'd come to... There was about four or five different sort of sects within Israel, and we know about some of them, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and there were the Sicarii, which we don't read about in Scripture, but historians say there was the Sicarii who carried around little knives called the Sicars, so that they could forcibly circumcise people, to get us right with God. There were all these different groups in Jesus' time of people who thought, we need to bring Israel God's people again. We need to bring it under the rule and reign of God. And about the only thing these groups could agree on was the Gentiles are the problem. We hate the Gentiles. And so we have all these books that are in the Bible. We also have just dozens and dozens of Jewish writings that didn't make the cut to get in the Bible. But they have really biblical sounding names. So if you see one in print, you may wonder, is fourth Ezra in my Bible? I only have a single Ezra. But there's all these other books that tell us about what people were thinking in the days of Jesus. And so we read, like in fourth Ezra, God says, I will not grieve over, the slaughter of the Gentiles. That's not going to grieve me. We read in books that sounded kind of like Psalms of Solomon. It kind of sounds like it could be in the Bible, right? It's not. The Psalms of Solomon, we read that the people were praying prayers like this: See, Lord, and raise up for us a king, a son of David. Undergird him with all strength to destroy, to purge from Jerusalem the Gentiles, to shatter all their substance with the iron rod. I mean, by the time of Jesus, the only thing anyone could agree on was, we hate the Gentiles. And so they were passing decrees. In the time of Jesus, they passed 18 decrees that, in some of these we've heard of, like they decided to separate from the Gentiles, that no one could eat with a Gentile. Those decrees went out in the years of Jesus. No one may eat with a Gentile. And, because their homes are dirty, their plates are filthy, they're just unclean. They decided, we're not going to let Gentiles pass the outer courts of the temple. We're not going to allow a single Gentile, even if they're a God-fearing Gentile. And of course, that's why Jesus turns the table and says, this was supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations. By the time of the first century, Israel has so lost its way as the people of God that they've become arrogant, ethnocentric, exclusive. They're more interested in maintaining their privilege than anything God had called them to. The truth, according to theocracy, Jesus says, anyone on the side of truth listens to me. The truth, according to theocracy, is we're God's people. It's all about us. We can do no wrong. We're his chosen ones. You wonder why, Israel couldn't accept that Jesus was the Messiah. It wasn't because they weren't looking for a Messiah. It was because they were looking for a Messiah who would say, Israel first. We're taking back Jerusalem. We're going to push out the heathen pagans. And Jesus died on the cross because he clashed with this kingdom. But he also clashed with Pilate. And Pilate's the representative of a whole other type of kingdom, the Roman Empire. And the nature of the empire is just absolute authority reigns, or absolute power reigns. Might makes right. If you've got power, it must be because God put you there. So the Romans began to believe that their emperors were sons of God, they called them. They were incarnate deities. And the only power here that Pilate understands is the only truth he understands is the power, the rule of absolute power. But Pilate has a problem, as I said. There's rebellions afoot during his rule, and for 20 years he's been having these problems since Caesar Tiberius put him in power. He's been having, he's been having Jewish rebels rise up and threaten his rule. He at one point decides to bring big emblems of the emperor and hang them on the temple. Another point decides to take money out of the temple to build an aqueduct, and the Jews are going nuts. In fact, at one point they appeal, before the time of Jesus, they appeal to Caesar, and Caesar rules in their favor. Pilate he's not doing what we asked, because the role of a governor like Pilate was to give the people as much leeway, or enough leeway that they wouldn't rebel, but not so much that they wouldn't pay their taxes, because the reality of the empire is all about economics. Now, Rome was an empire built on top of the rule of power and on top of violence. And Jesus said, anyone who listens to the truth knows that I'm telling the truth. But truth, according to the empire, was that might makes right. We rule the world, so God must have put us here, right? We're just preserving our way of life. That's the highest good in the empire. And they actually have started to believe their own propaganda, that they're bringing the peace of God to the whole world. Like they are the chosen ones to bring the Pax Romana, the peace through the sword, to the whole world. And Pilate here, Pilate's just a pragmatist. He's just a servant of the empire. He knows that he's a realist. He knows that, loving your enemies doesn't do anyone any good except getting them killed. He knows that only the strong survive. The meek don't inherit the earth. The meek don't inherit squat. That's Pilate's reality. That's his truth. He lives in the real world. So Jesus clashes with Israel. He clashes with the empire. But he also clashes with a different version of kingdom that actually didn't happen until quite recently. A few hundred years ago, some Christians in Europe began to talk about the ways in which God would bring the kingdom, And they noticed in this passage that Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. And they thought, well, of course not. It's heaven. And one day God's going to take us all there, away from this dreadful earth we're living in, away from this terrible, British Empire. And actually, the idea got picked up by some colonialists from Massachusetts, and they formed this whole idea, this very Greek, Gnostic, or even pagan idea called rapture. They said, God's kingdom is not about coming to earth. God's kingdom is not breaking into the present. God is going to evacuate us from this horrible place. And this idea has grown and grown and grown to the point where most of us are familiar with the notion of evacuation, rapture. And it was brought to us by the very same people that brought us the Salem witch trials in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So this version of the kingdom, though, doesn't come out of this scripture. It doesn't come out of the Bible at all. In fact, this scripture, when Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world, the word there, of, is almost always translated from. And it's kind of a curiosity why they said of there. Because it makes it sound like his kingdom isn't for this world at all, like it's a different place. But Jesus repeats it, and he says, my kingdom is not from this world. And when even the word of has a sense in which, it's not from of this world. But the picture Jesus gives us in the Bible of his kingdom is of one coming for this world. It's not from this world, but you're praying it in. Let your kingdom come on earth as in heaven. In the last days, we read in John's Revelation that the kingdom is going to come, the heavenly city of Jerusalem descending to earth. See, Jesus died because he went to the cross because he's clashing with all these other visions of the kingdom. In truth, I'd say according to, I don't even know what to call it, like rapture, or maybe Soul-landia. Like I don't know what you call this version of the kingdom. But truth, according to this vision, is we're all getting out of here. So none of this here really matters anyway. We just need to save some souls so we can all get out of here in time. But Jesus says, my kingdom is not from this world, and yet it's for this world. Now, Jesus died on the cross because of human choices. He died on the cross because his kingdom clashed. But as we read earlier, John 12, Jesus died because Jesus died by his own will to draw people into his kingdom. When I'm lifted up, I will draw all men towards myself. I mean, it's a kingdom, as you've seen, that just looks nothing like the kingdoms of this world. It actually draws people, not through fear, not through coercion, but Jesus said, when I'm lifted up, I will draw all men towards myself. And the reality is, Jesus' kingdom is kind of offensive to the kingdoms of this world. It can be offensive to many of us. I mean, Jesus' kingdom turns everything upside down. Have you noticed that? Like might doesn't make right, and the good guys aren't the guys on top. Actually, Jesus says, the first shall be last, and whoever wants to be great among you should take the place of a slave, a servant, and wash feet. I mean, in Jesus' kingdom, he doesn't say, the strong, the powerful inherit the earth. He says the meek inherit the earth. He says true power is weakness. I mean, you think about this. Jesus could have taken the throne in another way. I mean, he could have chosen another path to the throne, to his kingdom, than the cross. He could have. I mean, he could have used the sword. He could have gathered an army. He could have marched on Jerusalem. He could have just set up a new empire, wiping out his enemies, all just eliminating the opposition. And the fact is, Jesus was tempted to. You remember back in the wilderness when Jesus was tempted? And one of the three temptations was, from the devil, you bow down to me. You bow down to me, which implies you serve me, you surrender to me as king, and I will give you all the kingdoms of this world. You bow down to me, and I don't think Jesus' temptation Jesus was seriously tempted because of this strong desire in him to kneel before the devil. Like, that would be an easy temptation, right? Why would I kneel in front of you? Kneeling before somebody implies serving. Like, I'm going to do your bidding. You're the king. You're the Lord. And Jesus was seriously tempted to take a different road to his kingdom, one that was less costly. But of course, his true kingdom doesn't look anything like the kingdoms of this world. I mean, in Jesus' kingdom, the strong don't seek power. The strong lay down power. Jesus' kingdom isn't established by force, but by voluntary surrender. I mean, his kingdom defeats evil not by overpowering it, but by overcoming evil with good. His enemies aren't subdued by the threat of death. They're compelled by an offer of life. I mean, his kingdom, in his kingdom, people aren't enemies at all. I mean, they're hostages, right? I mean, his kingdom isn't established by conquering people, but by redeeming people who are enemies. His kingdom is from another world, and so territory is never won by the sword, but by the cross. His kingdom, because of that, is the people of his kingdom just don't prioritize self-preservation. They prioritize self-denial. I mean, the people of his kingdom don't say, me first. They say, me last. His kingdom it's not a tribe. It doesn't work like a nation, putting its members first, its citizens first. No. His kingdom is drawing people from every tribe, tongue, and nation to willingly bow before Jesus as king. That's the kingdom. And that's why when Jesus is lifted up, it draws all men towards himself, because no one's ever heard of a kingdom like this. No one's ever heard of a king like that. But the question that the cross forces on us, question that it just presses on us, is this: was Jesus a fool? Was Jesus a fool? I mean, is Jesus just naive about how the world works? I mean, the choice to enter Jesus' kingdom is to decide, that's how life works. I'm going to bow to the king who died on this cross. The choice to enter the kingdom is bowing to the ways of Jesus, surrendering to his ways. And we have to make up our minds. The question the cross just forces on us: was Jesus a fool? Is he naive? What about his plan for defeating evil? Does it even work? I mean, does it really work, or is it just religious naivety? I mean, is it true that cruciform love can defeat evil? Or is Pilate right about the truth that only power can end threats of evil? Only power can crush enemies. Might makes right. I mean, does Jesus' kingdom really lead to peace and life? Or is it just a pie-in-the-sky fantasy? Is our only hope for peace the Roman version, peace by the sword? I mean, we've got to decide, because the cross isn't just a sort of a small story in the Bible, is it? It's not just a peculiar little thing that you can toss in or toss out. The cross is the very center of the Bible, the center of the story, and it forces us to decide: is that really true about the world? Is it or isn't it? Is that really how kingdoms are built? But I want you to know this. I mean, as we think about this and decide again, you need to know that Jesus' power trumps every other form of power. Jesus' kingdom, in the end, wins, doesn't it? Like, in the end, Jesus wins. And why in the world, we asked last week, why would a man dying on a cross win? Why would that version of that path to king defeat every other worldly power? Well, here's the reason, friends. Because on the cross, Jesus does what no other government can do. He does what no superpower can accomplish. He does what no politician has ever thought of. He wins hearts and he redeems lives by drawing people into willing surrender. I mean, there's just no greater power on earth than that which is established by willing surrender. I mean, that's the marvel of the cross. You know, those first generations of people, they looked at the cross and they decided, this is what's truest about the universe. This is truer than any power we've ever seen. In those first generations of Christians, they bowed their knees to Jesus as king because they had seen something. They'd seen a form of power the world had never seen. And they decided, you know, if Jesus can conquer death, then what do we have to be afraid of? You know, if Jesus can defeat the worst evil the world can throw at him, well, to hell with fear. We're going to follow this guy. I mean, if Jesus can release people, release the worst of sinners from their sins into new life, well, what enemy couldn't he conquer? And so in the 3 centuries after Jesus' death, something happened that the world had never seen before. This crucified, rebellious Jewish guy from the middle of nowhere so inspired and drew men to himself that in 3 centuries, they defeated the Roman Empire. They brought it to its knees. I mean, in 3 centuries, they did something the world has never seen. The kingdom of God just rose and rose and rose until the Roman Empire had to bow. And they did it not by power, not by politics. They did it largely by caring for the dying, by taking in the rejected babies and raising them as Christians, by empowering women and empowering slaves with a dignity the world had never seen before. They did it by rejecting social segregation and by refusing to repay any evil with evil, but deciding if that is true, then the only response to evil is to forgive and serve and love. That is how the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our Lord and King. But you know the one thing they couldn't do in those days, the one option they didn't have? To vote. They couldn't vote. They didn't have the right to free speech or public assembly. They couldn't picket. They couldn't make demands. They couldn't even demonstrate, except the demonstration of cruciform love lived out day in, day out. Now, I know that everybody, after last year, we are all sick of politics, aren't we? And yet, you know, we can't get away from it because Jesus goes up against the political powers of his day and he starts talking about kingdoms and truth and power and how he's going to defeat them. But you know the most political thing you could do? You know the most political thing that any of you guys could do? The most political thing you could do, the most politically powerful and effective thing you could do would be to live as a Christian. That would be it. Like the most significant thing you could do would be to live in the way of Christ and his cross. Because the cross was Jesus' political victory. I mean, the most political thing God ever did was to flaunt the religious and civic political powers of his day by surrendering to them, to an unfair trial, to an unjust sentence, to the worst execution they could throw at him. And when he did that, the Apostle Paul in Colossians said, when he did that, he disarmed the powers and authorities. He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Friends, that's what it means to be the church. That's what the early church understood, that when that happens, there is no power on earth that can resist it. When that kind of love is shown, Jesus draws all people to himself, making a spectacle, making a mockery of the powers of this world. I mean, when you repay evil with love, I mean, you're cutting off evil at the legs. When you forgive those who've perpetrated evil against you, you're dealing a knockout blow to evil. When you lift up those who are trampled by evil systems, I mean, the poor, the refugee, the socially vulnerable, you just drive a stake in the heart of evil. Because cross-shaped, cruciform love has the power to survive the worst kind of evil and to even bring life back from the dead. Friends, that is why Jesus died. So let's all stand. We're going to worship now, just turning our eyes towards the cross, towards the King, and making the choice again to surrender to a king who said, my kingdom doesn't look like anything you've ever seen. It's not from this world. And yet it's breaking in all around you. It's inviting you in. So let's worship.
As we begin our worship, I invite the host forward as we give our offerings this morning. And I wanted to remind you that at any point during this, you can come up and light a candle, kneel before the Father, and pray. It's just an intentional way to engage with the Lord this morning. Gracious and astounding, God's love so confounding appears to us in a cleansing flow of blood. The Son left throne and glory, Father's wrath and fury in our stead. And for all the sins of all he bled. Stand in awe and worship and raise a voice in worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Behold the Lamb in heaven. He was dead, but God raised him from the grave. For his arm is mighty to save. Now glorified and reigning, the keys of death and Hades in his hand. And all hail the Lord of every man. Standing on worship and raise a voice in worship. a voice and worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Standing on worship. Raise a voice and worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Standing on worship, raise a voice and worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Oh, how we love Lord of Lords. Oh, how we love you. Oh, how we love the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Our Father, all of heaven roars your name. Sing louder and let this place erupt with praise. Can you hear it? The sound of heaven touching earth. The sound of heaven touching earth. Our Father, all of heaven roars your name. Sing louder. Let this place erupt with praise. Can you hear it? The sound of heaven touching earth. The sound of heaven touching earth. Spirit break out and break all walls down. Spirit break out. Heaven come down. Spirit break out. Break all walls down. Spirit break out. Heaven comes down. King Jesus, King Jesus, you're the name we're lifting high. Your glory shaking up the earth and sky. Revival, we want to see your kingdom here. Yes, we want to see your kingdom here. King Jesus, Spirit, break out and break our walls down. Spirit, break out. Heaven come down. King Jesus, you're the name we're lifting high. Your glory shaking up the earth and skies. Revival, we want to see your kingdom here. We want to see your kingdom here. Want to see your kingdom here. We want to see your kingdom here. Oh, we want to see your kingdom here. Go ahead and lift up a song of praise. You let your hearts cry out this morning. Well, God's presence is always here. He's always with us. But we can turn our hearts to Him and we can reach out to Him. We can open ourselves up to actually become a sacrifice. That we'd offer our bodies, we'd offer ourselves to Him. And so I challenge you this morning to come before Him as a sacrifice, to offer yourself and your bodies, to come in contact with the King. Lord, come and take your rightful place. Standing on worship, raise a voice and worship, come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Let's lift our hands to Him as we stand in awe. Standing on worship, raise a voice and worship, come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Stand in awe, stand in awe and worship. Raise a voice and worship, come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Yes, Lord. Wow. Oh, we love you. Spirit is here and he's among us. He's upon us. Let's just sing that again. Standing all in worship and raise a voice and worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Standing all in worship and raise a voice and worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Standing all in worship. Oh, raise a voice and worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Yes, Lord. Standing on worship. Oh, raise a voice and worship. Come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Your light shines through my darkness, all darkness, like a fire. It consumes all my fears and my failures. Your grace overwhelms like a flood, straight from heaven. And your hope opens eyes to the floodgates of heaven. And Jesus, King of all the earth, let the heavens proclaim your worth. The one true God defeated the grave. We join with angels and sing your praise. Jesus, King of all the earth, let the heavens proclaim your worth. The one true God defeated the grave. We join with angels and sing your praise.
Sing your praise.
Overthrown is the power of darkness, all darkness lost its hold. With your kindness and your goodness, your love breaks the chains off my heart, off my mind, and your power sets free all the captives, and you bring peace. Jesus, King of all the earth, let the heavens proclaim your worth. The one true God defeated the grave. We join with angels and sing your praise. Jesus, King of all the earth, Let the heavens proclaim your word. The one true God defeated the grave. We join with angels and sing your praise.
Sing your praise. Sing your praise. Sing your praise. Sing your praise. Oh, my soul.
No, my soul will sing. No, my soul will praise you. And no, my soul will sing. And no, my soul will praise you. My soul will sing. No, my soul will praise you.
There's an invitation around the time of Easter as we just look at the cross. There's that invitation from the cross to come and die that we might find life. And one of the ways that we say yes to that is just in the way we come to think about and respond to things in our people in our life that have wronged us, that have hurt us. Now, I don't know about you, but I love to see bad guys get what's coming to them. Like to see movies where they just, they're just pummeled, like their legs are cut out. I mean, I just love to see that because I'm human and probably because of the culture I was raised in. And the trouble with that is when people wrong me, I fantasize about doing that kind of thing. And yet the strange thing about the cross is that as we come towards it, God says, you're right. You're right. There's some business that needs to be dealt with. But the real evil that you face that needs to be handled, that needs to be put down, is that evil that within you that threatens to steal your soul, take your life. You're your own worst enemy. So the invitation of the cross is to say, Jesus, I need to repent. I need you. I recognize that it's me. I'm the one that needs, ultimately, I'm my own worst enemy. I need the forgiveness you offer. So I want to invite our prayer team forward. There's some of you who may need to respond to that today. I've just never thought about it that way. I've never understood Jesus that way. I need to say yes to him. I want to be freed from it may be some of you feel like I just feel so bound up by some of the things that I'm angry about, that have been done to me, that I'm just bitter about from the past. There's these candles here. We're lighting these as prayers. And you could Jesus had some thoughts about how to deal with unforgiveness and wrongs done to us. He said, if you have an enemy, you ought to pray for him. Because it's hard to deal with enemies. It's hard to deal with wrongdoing. You ought to pray for those that have hurt you. And so some of you could do that today as a response. I'm just kind of bound up by something from the past. I'm going to light a candle. I'm going to pray for those that have hurt me. Others of you, there may be some of you who feel like, your past just has such a hold on you. It just keeps you stuck, just the guilt of your life. I invite you to come and receive prayer this morning, to invite Jesus to free you. There's also our prayer team came early, some words for healing. God was touching some people in the first service and bringing some healing. There might be some people with the same things here. Arthritis, like a large knuckle in your left hand, a woman. God touched somebody with that in the first service and brought healing. Somebody here who has issue in your upper neck, a guy with upper neck, or a guy with earache, or ringing in your ears. If that's you, we want to pray for you. Somebody here, expectant mom, who's just fears around that. Somebody here with a heart murmur. And somebody here who waits tables at an Italian restaurant and has hip and knee pain. If that's you definitely need to come, because we ask God on Sunday mornings, God, is there anything you want to do? And we believe He's the creator of the universe. He created us. He's able to speak to us. And we often see Him show up and bring healing and freedom for people. So if that's you, please come as others go. If you feel nervous about coming, that's really a sign you should. So come as others go. The rest of you guys, go in peace. Have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.
Raise a voice and worship, come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Standing on worship, raise your voice and worship, come adore the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The King of